Good afternoon, all the participants. Welcome to this webinar from the Taxmann on the National Faceless Assessment Procedure and rulings. Taxmann has done a wonderful job in arranging this webinar. Perhaps this is the first time that the top brass from the legislation, judiciary, and executive have come together to bring their respective perspective on the faceless assessment. So welcome to, with me, I have the full panel. I am Sanjay Kumar, and I'm partner in Deloitte, and I have with me Mr. Pushpinder Puniha. Pushpinder was in the IRS for 36 years and superannuated in the month of January. He was the first principal DG with the National Faceless Assessment Center, and he was also instrumental in setting up the procedure. Before that, he held many positions as Principal Chief Commissioner of Uttar Pradesh and Western Uttar Pradesh and the Northwest Frontier Province. And he was also I have with me also Mr. Laliet Kumar. Mr. Kumar is the ITAT member. He spent almost like 20 years on the bar, and then in 2005 he joined the ITAT bench. At the moment, he is a judicial member with the ITAT Agra bench. Welcome, Mr. Kumar. I have also with me Mr. Ketan Ved. Ketan is a subject matter expert, and he would be joining us on this webinar. Ketan, welcome to this webinar. Let me make a very small presentation just to set the context. And this is the faceless assessment scheme was basically notified in August 2020. So it's about to complete almost like a year's time on the faceless assessment. And so this is a very timely webinar. It has been made part of the Income Tax Act with an introduction of Section 144B into the Act. National Faceless Assessment Center has various components under its structure, namely the regional centers, and then various units such as assessment unit, verification unit, review units, and technical units. At present, 95 assessment units are there, 35 verification units, 20 review units, and 4 technical units. The procedure is somewhat akin to what we have been doing in the what we have been seeing in the assessment procedure, that the NAFAC, which is the National Faceless Assessment Center, first serves a notice to the taxpayer under Section 143(2) of the Income Tax Act. The taxpayer may reply within 15 days from the date of notice. The center then assigns. So I was on the assessment units requesting for the information, and thereafter the assessment unit passes a draft assessment order, including proceedings after getting certain information. After the assessment is complete, then the case is transferred to the jurisdictional assessing officer, and then the certain review procedure is also undertaken. So I'll stop on that, and I would go over to my panelists, because they would have a lot more information to share with us. So Pushpinder, let me start with you. How do you think that the faceless assessment system has been working as envisaged by the tax department?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you all the participants. So let me begin by saying that this faceless assessment scheme is a pioneering initiative which India has taken, and nowhere in the world the same system has been undertaken or experimented with. So it is an innovative experiment which has been undertaken by the government of India. And there is an apprehension that this is basically been undertaken for the purpose of checking the rent seeking by the revenue department. But I beg to differ on this, that yes, that also is part of the motive. But primary concern of the government in introducing faceless assessment scheme is to reduce the cost of compliance by the taxpayer. Secondly is to give an ease of compliance where physical presence or physical rounds of the income tax office are no longer required to be taken. The third is that the scheme envisages a huge amount of collaborative effort from the taxpayers. There is a huge amount of trust which is placed in the taxpayers to file correct returns of income. And that trust speaks up when we see that a lot of information income tax department is now willing to share with the taxpayer even before the return is filed, as a reminder that this amount of information about you is already available with us. So as and when you file your tax return, please be aware that we know this much about you, so that the voluntary compliance increases. If you will notice that on the day the scheme was introduced, the taxpayers charter also was introduced, and then the taxpayer charter lays down certain duties on both of us. By both of us, I mean by the tax officials. In fact, three of us: the tax officials, the tax professionals, as well as the taxpayers. And that is, the duties primarily focus on one thing, that we have to mutually trust each other and collaborate to make sure that final tax assessment is what the income actually earned by the taxpayer. So the motivation is that. Now, how have we gone about it? Is the architecture is that we have segregated and divided the old assessment work into various units. The work is now assigned not to a single tax official, because the single tax official was a historical development in India. If you will read carefully, it in fact goes back to the introduction of the income tax in India by the British, and which was done in Lucknow, where it was that yes, and a single tax official will try and estimate the income of the taxpayer and take tax from him. Now we have moved to a system where a group of officials whose identity is not to be disclosed would look at the tax return of the assessee. They will compare it with the transactional information, the financial transactional information already available with the department. They will seek clarifications from the taxpayer on that return. The taxpayer will have the first opportunity of filing the reply. Either he or she accepts those differentials or he objects to it. And once he objects to it, the function shifts to verification unit. The verification unit is an independent set of officers which will investigate the issue which has been raised by the assessment unit and which has been replied to by the taxpayer. After the verification unit have done the investigation, the issue will once again come back to the assessment unit, and the assessment unit is required to issue a show cause notice and a draft assessment order to the taxpayer before framing the assessment. And even if at this stage the taxpayer has a different viewpoint, then the whole issue goes to another set of officers which constitute a review unit. The review unit will once again now look at all the replies, all the investigations, and give a kind of guidance to the assessment unit that what the taxpayer is saying is correct or not. Do we need to accept it, or do you need to go ahead and enhance his income from what he filed in his return? So there are lots of checks and balances which are built in the architecture to ensure that no not unrequired tax is charged from the taxpayer. You pay what is due from you. I am aware that at this stage, a lot of you will ask me question that this architecture probably has not worked very smoothly in the first year, but this is the architecture. And as Sanjay mentioned, there is a technical unit also. Four technical units have been placed under the National Faceless Assessment Center, primarily to ensure that any emerging judicial or any technical accountancy dispute which may lead to repeat litigation is nipped in the bud. So the purpose is to draw out a consensus on the emerging judicial and accountancy disputes, because it has been our experience that it is only about 15 to 20 issues which in different manifestation lead to most of the appeals. So the thinking is that if those can be resolved by the technical unit, then the litigation will reduce and the cost of compliance of the taxpayers will go down. I will stop at this stage, Sanjay, and I'll let the other panelists come in and share their thoughts on it.
No, Pushpinder, I think you really laid it out quite well. In fact, one of the important features that you mentioned was the draft assessment order, because that is something which is very much required. So let me take it to the next question that I had in mind, the role of the jurisdictional assessing officer, because there is a little bit of confusion as to what is the work that the faceless assessment does and what is the work that the jurisdictional assessing officer does. So can you clarify that? What is the role of the jurisdictional assessing officer?
Yeah, Sanjay, I think that's a very valid concern, because we have moved to a new system and a lot of people are confused about it. Let me first clarify that the faceless assessment architecture comes into play only after your case has been selected for scrutiny. So other than the scrutiny, everything else remains with the jurisdictional officer. It will not go to the faceless assessment center at all. So first of all, the role of the faceless assessment center as yet is limited to the cases which have been selected for scrutiny. And that also, the moment the assessment is completed, all the digital record, all the investigations and everything is given back to the jurisdictional officer. The text collection, if any mistake is there, any rectification and all is to be done, that remains within the purview of the jurisdictional officer. So the jurisdictional officer is still a face which is available to the taxpayer if he has some grievance which he thinks is apparent from record and which needs to be rectified or which needs to be corrected, even in those cases where the assessments have been framed by the National Faceless Assessment Scheme. So he has, or he or she, whosoever is the jurisdictional officer, it remains as a face interface, if I may say, an interface with a face to the taxpayer, so that all these modalities which are like apparent from record, or which the record speaks some mistake has been committed, he would take care of it, or he or she will take care of it. Thank you.
Oh, that's a very well explained, Pushpinder. Thanks a lot. Let me move to some of the problems that the taxpayers have been facing. And let me ask Ketan, some of the, what I've heard is that the corporate assessment and large taxpayers are required to make a voluminous submission. And what has been the experience of the corporate taxpayer? Many times I understand that the specifications or to load those documents is somewhat difficult. How, if that is one issue that you have also faced, Ketan, in your practice, and if there is one, then what can the government do to make certain corrective steps?
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Sanjay, from a taxpayer's point of view, my personal experience has been that things have been relatively easier compared to the earlier year where, submissions were to be filed on a portal with a limit on data which can be submitted, or by the email which required sending a series of emails where the data size and volume was big. practically we didn't see site having any issues during the assessment season. By and large, it had gone smooth till now. And the most notable thing here is that it was smooth even when, for a sizable part of the year, the taxpayer, the tax consultants, and the advisory fraternity was working from home. With this new portal and some functionalities included therein, there seems to be some challenges which I'm sure will iron out itself. For example, now each submission has to be uploaded with a digital signature. And if you have to use the digital signature, or the director or MD for a corporate assessee has to sign every document and see every document, this may become a bit of a challenge which needs, for which one needs to find a solution. Beyond that, what I personally felt was that the taxpayers and the tax consultants, with a battery of support staff, have been able to manage the uploading of details, particulars. And at the same time, one should also commend the efforts on the side of the tax department, where the officials have been going through the details filed virtually and completed assessment. Even for them, it was a kind of a monumental change from getting details and all in a print format properly arranged in hard copies to making assessments basis the data submitted electronically. The experience has been encouraging, save and except cases which we have been reading about in the press on the procedure not being followed, of issuing draft orders, passing orders before the time limits provided in the notice, non-consideration of submissions in a few cases, etc. What can be done more? I would say keep up and continue the efforts and attitude adopted last year. Learn from the procedural lapses which are being challenged at courts and ensure that it doesn't get repeated. Systems are in place. The manpower with the experience of 1 year of faceless assessment will be much better equipped to handle this assessment and the tasks going forward. One thing which I think the taxpayer fraternity is looking forward to is specific attention on the manner in which a personal hearing request is handled. Traditionally, all of us have been, kind of working in an environment where a paper is understood and appreciated better if it is explained on a face-to-face hearing. Here, the apprehension for the last year was that I have emailed, uploaded submissions. How do I ensure that the authority has seen it, read it, understood it the way in which I would want him to? He may or may not agree with my point, but at least I need to ensure that I convey my point across. This aspect needs to be handled appropriately. I have attended virtual hearings basis client requests, and I should say the system or the program which was used for virtual hearing was far more superior and technological advanced, and I did not for a moment feel that there was something lacking.
So Ketan, basically what I get to hear from you that barring the odd reason, and some of those reasons you have mentioned, it's basically a change of the medium from a face-to-face to a digital medium, and there will be some issues that whether the person understands. But that takes me to the next question, and that is to Laliet. And Laliet, when I was scanning some of the, and also I've also seen that there are large number of writ petitions which have been filed, where the questions of natural justice or being heard have been raised, and many times they feel that and I think Ketan also mentioned that the video conferencing at times leaves a personal connect missing. So does it create some kind of limitation of time, articulation, or sufficiency of explanation, or limit the effect of faceless assessment?
Yeah, of course. Good evening, everybody. When we are going for a faceless hearing, the important aspect which is required to be considered by the revenue is that if they understood the point, then there is no mechanism for the SSC to find out whether the officer who is giving the hearing has understood the point, or the SSC was required to elaborate more or give more emphasis on the point with the help of the judgments or the other factual aspects. Because there is no mode of communication. It's a one-way communication by the SSC addressing to the person sitting across without knowing what is his reaction. The hearing is, in fact, the purpose of hearing is to thrash out the fact and to understood the point of view of the SSC, or the SSC understood the point of view of the revenue, which is, in my view, is little difficult when we have a faceless assessment without knowing the person who is hearing, without knowing what reaction he would be giving to the point which the SSC is addressing.
Yeah, another question which is coming, and that I'm taking from what Mr. Puniha said, and he talked about that this is for the first time something like this is being done in any of the tax jurisdictions around the globe, and many tax jurisdictions are also thinking or do that. They look for the group assessment or team assessment. Could something have been done to be taken that way, that could have taken care of many of these procedural, which is coming through this digital faceless assessment procedure? Would have been a better mechanism that could have retained some good aspect of the years of learning through the face-to-face assessment, and could have been presented a far better experience to the taxpayer? What will be your suggestion on that?
My point of view is very simple. We in India are determining the tax assessment based on the SSC. It is the SSC oriented, not the group oriented, number one. Number two, we have a different assessment here with the different units of the SSC. Then there are aspects, if you go for a group assessment, then the very purpose...
when I say group assessment, is like a group of officers doing the assessment.
That is what I'm coming to. When we are going for a group assessment, then group of officers are doing it, then the scheme which we are working on, that is the faceless assessment, will fail, because then you will be interacting with the people, which in fact, what is the point of view having the group assessment with the SSC? Then there will be physical interaction, and the very purpose of faceless assessment will be defeated. That's one point. The second point is, again, coming back to, we have a SSC oriented, then we have different SSC working on the, having different role models or different profit making or income. That cannot be clubbed because it is only SSC oriented. The third very important point, which I feel is important, is to the first appeal is a quasi-judicial authority. The neutrality of the quasi-judicial authority is required to be ascertained. Whenever a group of officers are adjudicating the issue, not only the neutrality, but who passes the order and who owns the responsibility. That also is a challenge which, of course, with the passage of time, the courts will examine whether the neutrality has been maintained by the department. The second aspect is whether who is the person responsible for passing good or bad order, or it is a group of people who are passing the good order or bad order. So sometimes there is an order passed by the authority ignoring the settled principle of law, ignoring the law laid down by the High Court of the Supreme Court, and that authority, because it's a group assessment, one officer reviewing the other's order, other officer reviewing and issuing a show cause notice, ultimately who committed a fault and when the fault has been committed. That will be a big challenge over a period of time. That will be resolved by the superior courts whenever they are whenever they will examine the faceless assessment scheme or the appellate scheme. That will be a big challenge.
But Laliet, that is precisely happening through these assessment units, verification units, and the technical unit, that they are separate set of officers, a separate set of units, and the assessment order is moving across these units, and finally at the end of it, the taxpayer is getting a product which is nameless, faceless, and is basically coming out from the NEFAC. That is what is actually written. There is no name mentioned in that. So the thinking which was there earlier, the jurisprudence, the way it developed earlier, has now need to, with the different procedure, would be slightly different. How would you see that? Isn't that changing the overall the framework and the architecture of the tax law jurisprudence?
The point which you are conveying is perfect, but from the adjudication point of view, sometimes somebody violates an order. He or she chooses not to comply with the order passed by the High Court, assuming there is a High Court order and a demand, and directing the CIT appeal to decide this issue. Despite the direction, and there is also a direction that this judgment is required to be considered. That judgment is not considered, and the officer was required to be, taken care of under the Contempt of Court Act. Then whether the unit will be considered, or only, there are a group of people who are going through the assessment order or the appellate order, then the question is, who will be responsible for not complying? Then somebody has to find out who is the actual person who can be asked, look, you are the person who has not complied. In fact, I suggested, you have not agreed. Then there is question which, in fact, with the passage of time, the Honorable High Court and the other courts will take into consideration, and definitely will come out some way out to find out who is the person not following the law.
Okay, so you mean to say that the jurisprudence on that will slowly develop?
Yes, it is developing. It is growing. It is developing day and night, because we have recent judgment from Delhi High Court as well as from Bombay High Court, where the issue was not considering the reply, passing the order beforehand without waiting the deadline to come over, not giving the opportunity of hearing. These orders are basically, in fact, where the violation of principle of natural justice has been denied to the SSC, but simultaneously, which is very important for the revenue to appreciate, that it is not only the efforts of the SSC which is going in vain, but also the revenue, and it is in fact burdening the system if the revenue is passing the order without considering the reply, passing the order beforehand, asking the SSC to run to the Honorable High Court, get the order quashed. High Court is remanding back. Ultimately, its system is choking on account of this kind of orders.
Okay. So
let me Sanjay react. Give a quick.
Okay. Why not?
Just a little take from what the architecture is. The points which Laliet is raising are very, very valid. The first point I want to make is, since the system is completely digital, so there is a digital trail which is never going to be effaced, which is showing which officer at which level took which viewpoint and decision. So Lalitji's point of view is very well taken, but it is possible for the NEFAC to trace out exact person, exact officer, and for all times to come, in fact. The file could get lost, the papers could get misplaced. Here it is a digital imprint. It will remain for all times to come. And this is based on a server. It is not on the officer's email or so. So it is a permanent record. So it will be possible to trace out the officer who has taken an X decision if it violates the principles which have been laid out by the superior courts in a Y case. So we will be able to get that, and we already have put that in practice. And I can share it with you that those cases which are being noticed in the High Court, it is very unfortunate that the principles of natural justice were short-circuited there. I am sure this was the teething problems of the system which have led to some issues. And what my data till now suggests is that in fact it has happened in minuscule number of cases which can be counted in maybe dozens or 100 out of the more than lakh assessments which we have done. And the figures show two statistics need to be kept in mind. The number of assessments which used to be framed under 144, which is like no compliance by the SSE, even when the replies were being filed by the SSE and were not being taken on record, those have decreased dramatically. The second is that the number of appeals out of the assessments has fallen dramatically as of now. So both these are very positive indicators for the scheme that yes, we are much, much better already in the first year than we were over a number of years of evolving one assessing officer and one taxpayer kind of a system. We are already far better in our first year. And I must, as an ex-officer, own up the responsibility wherever our systems have let us down. Because at times, we are not systems people and we underestimated the need of time to develop those new functionalities. So that is where at times we have been let down. So, but the system is constantly evolving. The new portal is coming. I'm sure this aspect of not meeting the principles of natural justice in the next cycle of assessments would be more or less absent. And if an officer will commit an infraction of those principles, rest assured, he will face the wrath and the music of the department.
But Pushpinder, let me put another thing, which is what I get to hear from many people, that they feel that the tax officer during the video conference interaction may not have understood, or they get anxious whether the people are understanding their viewpoint. And they also fear that the tax officer, for various reasons or for historical reasons, they may not have had the exposure, particularly on the complex transactions, because I know that it's a pretty flat structure, and the cases get allocated to any person anywhere, and there is no, because it's a very allocation oriented, and nobody has any clue about that. How do we mitigate that kind of anxiety among the taxpayers?
Yeah, that point is very valid, and Laliet raised it, I think, very, very clearly, and he articulated it like a judicial officer would. Because, particularly us Indians, we have a lot of gestures, like, look, I'm speaking, and I'm conveying something through my body, through my gestures, and we read so much into it. The new system requires a different way of articulation, in fact. I must say that the taxpayers, as well as the tax practitioners, according to me, would have to kind of update their skills of critical writing, conveyed in simple terms what is a complex transaction. That is an art which everybody will have to learn slowly, because you will not have the benefit of those body language and the body gestures which we normally do. That point is well taken. But what is laid out in the architecture of the scheme is that, look, what is so much better than the previous scheme again here? There will be compulsorily a show cause notice. There would be, before framing, a draft assessment order. And if it is not done, this in itself would cause serious trouble for the team passing the order, as well as the order, since it is laid down in the scheme, would be bad in law and in the facts of the case. So those two things are built into the scheme itself. And secondly is that if the taxpayer asks and the officer feels that the clarification is required, then video conferencing availability would be given to the taxpayer or the tax practitioner. But we, as I said, so we will have to learn how to articulate ourselves without having an eye contact or without having gestures or reading the body language. That is something which we will have to slowly evolve and learn in the new system. That is new skills.
Yeah. Another suggestion which is coming to my mind, and that is on the just to mitigate this aspect of flat structure, because the world is moving, recognizing the industry and business specialization. Could this, the faceless assessment been broken into the industry and business specialization, and that could have mitigated the question that I put for earlier on the complex transaction, which would be particularly in the context of a particular business. And for the faceless, for the small and medium enterprises, it could have been, for the taxpayers, it could have been either the old scheme could have been retained or something like that, which is coming to my mind. Do you think, Pushpinder, since you articulated about the scheme, could something like this have been a better way to move?
Yeah, this point is well taken, and this was deliberated a lot on this. Though you're right, in the first year, initially, the way the scheme was visualized, it was a completely flat structure where algorithmically the cases will be allocated to any team of officers. But this problem, which you are articulating, was taken up by a number of people, number of taxpayers and tax professionals also. After this, there is a thought process going on where in the allocation rule, the specialization of the team of officers would be a factor. So it is not that it will be a completely flat structure. It will be a structure. It will be anonymous again, because there will be, say, 100 teams which have specialization, say, in the cases dealing with the film industry. So it can go to any of those 100 cases, wherever they are located, and they need not be in say, Bombay, Calcutta, or Madras or so. It may be a team which is sitting, say, in Chandigarh, but they have specialization in this aspect. So this is a factor which can very easily be read into the allocation rules of the cases so that this matching takes place. And this point is very well taken, because at times it does require a domain knowledge of a particular industry or a particular transaction or a particular business to frame a good tax assessment or to do good investigation. Yes. And I'm sure the department is cognizant of it, and they will take care of this aspect also in coming years.
Let me ask Lalitji a question. Lalitji, I've often heard that the lack of ownership is there on any tax adjustments. People could do any kind of adjustment. How do you think this lack of ownership could be dealt with, particularly in the cases which have disproportionate adjustment, and how the judiciary would see that? You did talk about some of the how do we deal with a particular officer? How do we say that a particular officer is identified who has not looked into the various judicial disciplines, etc.? So my question is slightly away from there, but talking about the tax adjustments and the lack of ownership on those adjustments.
The aspect of a tax adjustment is primarily a very checkered issue, because there are a lot of multinationals who are in fact facing this issue. They have the lot of pending issues pending before one forum the other, and the tax demands are there, and the tax demands are huge sometimes, which is disproportionate sometimes to the adjustment, sometimes to the tax demand also. So what is required to be seen is, because we are in a stage where every year is a separate assessment year, and unless the assessment is finalized, the tax demands remain there, or it is staying. So the question is, which we are dealing in the tribunal also, because there are demands for the previous year, or there is demand for this year. The previous year's demand is stayed, it is different. So in fact, that needs a comprehensive understanding of the business of the SSC as well as the concern of the assessing officer. Sometimes there are cases where the SSC, after getting the refund and after getting the assessment order and demand, may not be available to the revenue for recovery. So sometimes revenue out of their concern of recovering the amount do not adjust the amount because the subsequent amount is due. And same is there. The SSC says that there is I'm not doing my business, there is a demand, there is a refund, please adjust it. So this is ultimately, somebody has to apply his mind and balance the equity, and thereafter take the call. whether it is the assessing officer or by the CIT appeal or at the higher forum, maybe the tribunal or by the High Court. Somebody has to apply his mind, balance the equity, see whether the SSE has the resources to spare some money, or the money which SSE is sparing is utilized by him for the business purposes, which will give better yield than parked in the income tax department. So this is.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. Let me ask Ketan, and particularly from the taxpayer point of view, what has been your experience on the final assessments? Whether absence of this virtual hearing provides a license to the assessing officer to ignore taxpayer submission and pass an order which just does not take into account the submission. Have you experienced any such order? Or let me also put another question to that, which is basically on the quality of the orders. Do you think from the earlier one, when manual, I'm calling it manual, as opposed to the digital or the faceless assessment, do you think there has been a desired quality change in the orders? What is your view on this?
Sir, the experience has been mixed. We have seen cases where addition disallowances which were being made traditionally and which had continued because they were made in the earlier years. We have seen those additions being stopped. And when I say they have been stopped, I would presume that these additions are not repeated because the appellate orders in favor of the taxpayer are accepted by the revenue authorities, or a fresh examination or a fresh approach has been gone into the issue to see whether what the assessee's point of view is correct or not. I would not say the quality of the orders is akin to manual ones, because there have been surprises where, as we have been discussing, orders are passed without draft orders, without hearings, without looking at the submissions. But the orders passed which have crossed the procedural barriers are much more superior in quality, and I personally feel if at all there is a disagreement between the taxpayer and the tax department, defending those orders would be a challenge for the taxpayers. Once again, as we said, that the tax jurisprudence is based on the fundamentals of principle of natural justice. Non-granting of virtual hearings or non-consideration of submissions has been a point of concern. And there is a hope that going forward, at least these things would be ironed out, because orders passed ignoring the submissions would never stand the test of scrutiny. And that's where right from the start of the faceless regime, taxpayers and tax advisors have realized the need for a detailed, correct and complete submission, precisely to the point which is made, rather than a lengthy submission with a series of case laws, etc., without explaining the facts. In coming days, the quality of submissions would determine the fate of the issue, is what my thought is. But we should remember that this is the first experience for both the sides, and hence the procedure, quality, etc., will take time to evolve with experience.
Oh, no, Ketan, you mentioned a very good pointers that don't make a very unnecessary submission, because it is very important to convey in a very precise manner to the assessing officer on the other side in the faceless scheme, and to take note of what you are trying to submit, so that they can also understand. Let me just ask one more question to you, which is basically on the jurisdictional assessing officer. And you may have undertaken some 154 corrections on some of the assessment orders which have come out from the NAFSC, and how difficult it is, or what is the ownership that you see with the jurisdictional officers taking the assessment order forward, because earlier it was the same assessing officer who used to do the scrutiny as well as make any kind of corrections. How do you see that? And do you think any of these matters after the 154 has been contested in appeal? I suppose that will be still some time, because the procedure is not very, but anything that you may, which has come to your notice, in such short period, 1 year time also.
On the subject of 154, given the transfers within the tax department, I would not see a difference between the jurisdictional assessing officer being called upon to rectify an order passed under the faceless scheme, because by and large, I would not say in all cases, but in a sizable number of cases, we were stuck with we were facing a situation where the subsequent incumbent officer had to rectify, or he was called upon to examine the record and rectify the errors in which were being pointed out by the taxpayer in an assessment order passed by his predecessor officer. What the section 154 is all about is of rectifications error apparent on record. Now, whether the order is passed by Mr. X or Mr. Y, or if the order is passed by a faceless assessment center, if there is an error and that error is apparent on record, then it has to be rectified. This rectification can be carried out by the current assessing officer. The only difference now is that the detailed submissions filed with the faceless assessment center and the rectification rights remain with the jurisdictional assessing officer. However, the legislature and the scheme has taken care of it and provided in section 144B132, if I am not wrong, that the faceless assessment center shall, after completion of the assessment, transfer all the electronic records of the case to the assessing officer having jurisdiction over the said case for such action as may be required under this act. And I think the first action which would be required would be rectification of errors, if any, in the order. And once this procedure which is laid down is followed, the situation is the same as earlier, where the burden to rectify an error is put on the current incumbent officer. It is too early in a day to say what will the jurisdictional officer do or see in a faceless error, because we've all filed rectification applications and are awaiting rewards. But if the point made in the rectification application is emerging out of or borne out from the record, the awkwardness or the chances of the jurisdictional officer seeing merits in the claims are brighter. And, I may sound repetitive, but it all boils down to the quality of the details filed and the submissions made.
The very important point, Ketan. Let me, Pushpinder really laid it out what the overall objective is, and I totally agree with that, Pushpinder. And I also understand that any revenue system, unless the audit system does not work very properly, the effectiveness and the efficacy and the efficiency of the revenue department would not remain where it is. So it is very important that the cases which are where certain challenges are there, where the filings are not as per the law as it is obtains, then obviously that they have to be corrected, and this has to be done through the scrutiny or the faceless, either whether in manual mode or otherwise. But now that we have embarked on the faceless assessment scheme, I wish to ask each of the panelists on what, according to you, would be the 3 suggestions that would lead to the desirable goal that the government has set before itself on this faceless assessment. Let me start with Laliet on the 3 suggestions that you would give, which would improve the system of the faceless assessment. You can be just it can be one-liner also, because that is something which will be important to note for everyone. 3 suggestions.
Yeah. The first suggestion is the neutrality of the institution or the authorities passing the order. They have to maintain the neutrality. They should not wear the hat of the revenue while passing the order. They should consider the aspect of the Judicial High Court, which invariably are there, but there are contrary views. They should understand that whenever they are passing any order, that should be passed in accordance with the law laid down by the Judicial High Court, and they should not deviate. That is one. If they are maintaining the neutrality and objectivity, then the fate of the SSC will be there. That's one issue which I feel is of paramount importance. The second issue is whenever there is a variation in the order, draft order also, then the detailed Shukas notice should be given to the SSC, asking the SSC to give the reply to the draft, even to the draft assessment, or whenever you are doing it, then they should take care of this. Third is, which is equally important, whenever you are allocating the matter to a specialized agency, then the algorithm which is used should be, like it should not be, because ultimately algorithm or the data is required to be maintained by the neutral body where they have the all records of the assessing officer and their background and what kind of order they had passed in the past. So that should be maintained with the utmost neutrality, without any seeking at the computer ji bataiye kaun sa, which is officer who is good in this. So that cannot be the case. So we have to have a system where we have a faceless assessment, but ultimately the impartiality, fairness is always expected. So that kind of things are required to be considered. Almost the three issues which I feel are there.
Okay, so let me move to Ketan, and then I come to Pushpinder, because I started with Pushpinder, so I'll end with Pushpinder on this, on the three suggestions. So, Ketan, your suggestions on the three suggestions?
The first thing which I think should be done will be kind of a confidence building measure, as was discussed, that there is a responsibility accounting internally in the tax department, and erring tax officers are being questioned or held up, or I would recommend that some sort of data is given out in the public, obviously without taking names on what was it, so that just that the confidence in the public in the whole new scheme of things is developed. The second thing is the law as it stands today. If you read 144B, there is still some doubt on the hearing aspect, and so that needs to be clarified. And lastly, speaking from the tax officer's point of view, maybe the officers also require trained manpower to support them, because you have to have equal force on both the sides to.
Oh,
so these
thanks.
are
No, I really appreciate the confidence building measure, because that is something which is very much required. Over to you, Pushpinder.
Yeah,
Three
sure.
suggestions.
In fact, my first suggestion, I would second what my fellow panelist, Ketan, has already articulated, that the basic premise of the scheme is voluntary compliance by the taxpayer in a collaborative environment. So collaborative environment first requires that I trust the other person. So we definitely need to build a mutual trust so that the compliance comes from taxpayer. As a tax administrator, I know it that I just do not have the wherewithal of looking at all transactions or all tax returns. So my tax base and my tax collections can only increase if I can assure a man on the street that I know a lot about you, but I'll be fair to you. Here is my system. Come file your tax return. Nothing will happen to you. And if you read empirical evidence which has come from developed countries, the rate of tax compliance is directly correlated to the potential of the tax official to reach the financial transaction imprint I have left behind. So my whole idea should be to convey that I know your financial transactions imprint. I don't need to have any other power. And this is where I think the tax department is moving in the right direction. If you have seen it, the 26 AS statement has been expanded in last 1.5 years substantially. It has become the annual financial statement. And it is our endeavor that as we go in the years forward, we will be giving most of the financial transactions information pre-filled in the tax return to the taxpayer, so that he has a reminder to him that please trust me, I know this much about you, come and file your correct return. So this is the way forward, and it's a challenging way forward. How do we collaborate and how do we mutually win the trust? And as Ketan rightly points out, unless and until we can have that trust, we are not going to make a great success out of it. My second suggestion on this is something which is which is our as yet we are in the evolving process. My suggestion to everybody is let the system stabilize. There is a huge gap between what we desire and what the digital software or the hardware available with the department can take on right now. Let's freeze the changes for a while. Let them run through. If we see any change required, consider it, filter it, distill it, run it through the systems analysis. Can it be handled by my digital or my software or my hardware? Then only give an assurance and change those things. Right now, in our gusto to like kind of give quick results, we have gone in for quick fixes. If we go for band-aids, the whole system, there is a fear of the system collapsing. So let the system stabilize. The architecture, I assure you, is very sound. There are teething problems. Let's solve them out. And as Lalitji was saying, let's meet those objections which the higher judiciary is pointing out to them. How do I make my digital video conferencing better, that there is no challenge in the higher judicial forum to the principles of natural justice? And if I fail in giving a draft assessment order of a show cause notice, then I need to make my system fail proof, that I cannot draft an assessment order till a show cause notice or a draft assessment order has been served and I have the evidence of that on my digital forum which is in front of me. And the third is a bit of a revolutionary thing, and it comes from my experience of handling the elections on behalf of Election Commission at some areas. They have something called a C-Vigil. C-Vigil is a smartphone application which is available to the voter, by which they can anonymously send any information where there is a violation of an election law. I would want the income tax department, the day a case is selected for scrutiny, a smartphone application should be available to the taxpayer and to the tax practitioner from that day onwards. And if there is any infraction of any of the procedures which is laid down, they should have the benefit of reaching the higher echelons in the administrative setup, so that the system at the top understands what are the emerging problems. I'm not saying that by this app you're going to solve the individual problems, but you will be able to generate a typology of the problems, which can be then sorted out digitally or by manpower training, as Ketan was pointing out, and we can deal with it. And this kind of a digital technology is now available. Don't give it to every taxpayer, I'm saying as yet. Give it to those less than 1% of the cases which we pick up for scrutiny. And they will have this smartphone application where the top administration and the department will know what is the problem. And then they can solve those problems out. These are the three suggestions which I have.
Thanks, Pushpinder, and thanks, Ketan and Lalitji, for three of those suggestions. I'm sure we are noting it down somewhere. And I definitely see this point that communication has to be far more. And some of the suggestions that you made, Pushpinder, that also makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure we would get to inform the tax department that things like that could be done. I am also looking at some of the questions which have come from the people in the audience. And one set of questions are on the principle of opportunity of being heard. The various high courts have been setting aside the assessment orders because the principle of opportunity has not been adhered to. I'm also reading that personal hearing sought by the assessee but not allowed also creates difficulty for the taxpayer. And the NFAC has not really taken due note of the applicable jurisdictional court decision, which Lalit ji pointed out at some point during the conversation. So these are the 2-3 pointers which has come. Lalit ji, would you want to add anything on the context of these 3-4 questions? Then I'll move to some other ones.
These are basic problems which are being faced by the SSE. In fact, a lot of decisions by the tribunals are also there where the jurisdictional high court has been ignored by the NFAC, and some directions were passed by the tribunal, putting the record straight, saying that the jurisdictional high court decisions are binding on the faceless appellate authority whoever is passing the order, because that ultimately relate back to the assessing officer, where the assessing officer is situated, whether it is situated in A high court or B high court. If the high court is available, may not be to the liking of the revenue officer, but that's the law of land which is required to be adhered, unless there is a change in law or the high court order has been set aside by the Supreme Court, that is by the Supreme Court.
I'm seeing another set of questions, which is also what Ketan mentioned during his intervention. And it says something like the time allowed to file the objections are too short, or adjournment was not granted. That's the one thing. The second is the assessment order passed before the expiry of the time allowed in the show cause notice. Or the third one is no show cause notice was issued even though variation was proposed in the assessment order. And the objections filed by the assessee was not even considered in the final assessment order. How do we tackle that? Pushpinder, this is a question to you. This is basically leading to the quality of the assessment order and making sure that some of the outline procedure are adhered to in terms of the taking into account the show cause notice, giving them adequate time. Then whatever the objections are filed, that has to be part of the assessment order. How do you think that can be corrected?
Yeah, sure. I mean, these are very valid concerns, and it is very unfortunate that this has happened. But my data set as yet suggests to me that this has happened in very few cases. As even Ketan was very clear in accepting that and articulating it, that in most of the cases, yes, the orders have taken into account the submissions made. How it has happened, the way I look at it, it is primarily because of the two reasons. One is, at times our systems have not been as robust. By system, I mean our digital systems have not been as robust as we presume them to be. This was a first year of implementation. Otherwise, in the architecture, it is laid out, and the SOPs which are there, the standard operating procedures which we have laid out, make it abundantly clear that no order can be passed without a show cause notice and a draft assessment order. So if it has happened, it is failure of our basically system. I'm sure no officer would go and take this panga. It is like taking a straight panga where there's a digital record that this did not happen. So somewhere down the line, the systems have let down. And secondly, Sanjay, the point which you also raised and which Ketan also raised, there is an issue as yet of owning this scheme also by the departmental officials, by the taxpayers, by the tax professionals, as well as the training in the new environment. So we are lacking in that. The one problem which I can share from the practical thing now. Now, our way of communication, which we devised in the system, is all email based originally. That an email will be sent to the taxpayers, and I can share with you that in the initial 58,000 cases which we picked up for scrutiny under this, we found that in more than 17,000 cases, the emails given to us had stopped functioning. They were no longer in operation because people give emails of the taxpayer tax office में CA के ऑफिस में जिसकी भी email है उसकी दे दी भर दी, उसने वो email ही बंद कर दी. So 17,000 of our notices out of 58 were not getting served on the taxpayer because the email which was there on record was no longer functional. And then we could check out that they have bounced once, twice, thrice. So now, even internally, we thought about it that in India, probably like this is something which we kind of didn't take into account. Smartphone is now far more a tool than an email. Then an SMS is a far better way of communicating to the taxpayer than an email. So we have kind of already modified that to an extent that yes, the opportunity may be given through an SMS also, so that sufficient notice goes. Sometimes it happens that the time is given short is because the taxpayer has not seen his email for 10 days. It's been given 15 days, so he sees that I've been given only 5 days. I'm not defending those cases where yes, enough time has not been given, but it happens like that also. So we have to, as we evolve into a new system, it's a very huge dramatic change. So according to me, it will take few years before it stabilizes at the margin. Largely it has stabilized, but those persons who are on our webinar, I would request them, please update your emails. Don't give those emails which are not functional, because that is our way of communication. Please update your cell phone numbers, because the alternate way of communicating in a digital world is through the SMS. So if we don't have those two means, then we are reduced to how do I serve in so we had to evolve one method where we did even physical notice services in the first year in some cases to trace out the people that please reply. Your email is not working. Though we maintained it in the faceless kind of a system, it was done through a centralized processing unit. So we do have these problems, and then points are very well taken that we will have to evolve into the new system slowly.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point that the channel of communication is mail or a phone number, and sometimes also. So now in the digital medium, all the emails have to be the ones where you are actually there, so that the communication channels can work very, very smoothly. So that's a very, very valid point, Pushpinder. And I'm also looking at some of the other questions, and there is a very good suggestion. They say that why not fix a time limit for the reply by the NAFSC? Should there be a time limit so that each of the procedure, be it the verification of this or communication with the taxpayer, that should have a time horizon, and not that you communicate with the taxpayer towards the end, and so that they are not able to give their point of view in a good time, and the final order is passed without such thing. Ketan, have you received something like that? Have you seen something like this where not adequate time was given before the final assessment order was issued?
Yes, there have been cases where you have been given only a couple of days time to respond to a voluminous kind of a question or a query, and you are asked to produce various details, etc. And there have also been times where you have been given sufficient time, and you will also find a case where you were given a time before you went to file the and mind you, cases where you went on time to file the details. When you open the website to file the details, you will see there is an order uploaded. So there have been cases where such things have happened.
Okay, but there must be far and few between.
Yes,
there would be one or two. So as Pushpinder also says that not that the system is perfect, and this is only 1 year time, and still to complete 1 year actually. We still have another 25 days to go before the system can be considered to be 1 year old. But in the interest of all the taxpayers, each of those aspects have to be tightened. The questions have also been asked about the accountability of the officers working in the NFSC and how do we fix that? And that is something which Lalitji, you mentioned quite in your response. And they also say that SSEs often raise complaint that their online replies are not considered by the officers. So we have discussed this aspect, but still, in the interest of the taxpayers, who the audience, would you want to say any more words on the accountability aspect, and how does the judiciary would take that further?
In my opinion, whenever any replies is received by the office of the NFAC, then an acknowledgement email should be sent. If it is not already in the procedure, then it should be sent that the email has been received by the office, and so that it will give confidence that my letter has reached to the office of, because it is not in neither here nor there. It has reached, and if it is reached and there is a confirmation email, then it will be sufficient proof that he or she sent the email along with the reply which was duly received. This is one aspect. Then, as Ketan was referring, that somebody, whether the officer has opened the email or not. We initially last year we had seen a lot of cases where the CIT exemption had not even seen the email sent by the SSE. So it was not a few number. There are many hundreds of the cases of this nature where the documents were filed by the assessee before the CIT exemption, and CIT exemption have not even opened the email. So that's very, and it is in fact burdening the office of CIT exemption. Of course, but to the tribunal also, because whenever, and for the purpose where there is a huge demand and high-pitched demands are raised on account of non-submission or non-confirmation of the replies, then though it may be 100 of cases, but each 100 of having the huge demand has to rush to the court, spend a good amount of money to get it corrected. So why even one case goes like this, where the request was there not considered? Why even one? So as Pushpinder sir is referring to, that the system is in the nascent stage, but still the assessee will suffer a heart attack if he gets the amount of tax for 100 crore. Even the biggest client will suffer, and it is not payable.
The point is very well taken, that why when in one case something like this should happen, and your suggestion on the moment you file it and the documents have been uploaded, automatic email should go to the taxpayer saying that it's an acknowledgement that we have received your papers or whatever. Something like that will be a good way. Another question which has come, and I think it is a very important one. They say that the bulky data, how do you upload it? We have of course asked. They say that can we get certain assistance in case the taxpayer faces certain technical issues with the platform? Now that's a very valid suggestion. Which is the place that they go to so that they can get the support of the technical person to organize their filing of the papers, because otherwise the taxpayer is in default. And I think it's a very valid suggestion. Any suggestion? Yeah, Laliet?
Yeah. My suggestion is when the new system in Delhi High Court was introduced, where there was a digital filing of the writ petition and the tax appeals, then the Bar Association, as well as in collaboration with the software provider, have set up a number of units for helping the professional how to upload the data, how to scan it, how to get the things uploaded and sent to the system. So the same way, if the revenue department and the confidence building set up various kiosks during the time where they have the facility of high-speed data uploading, high-speed scanner, of course for a charge, then things, and this will only require for some time, maybe for 30 days, and thereafter the person will get themselves accustomed with how to deal with it. So that is one important aspect if we have this kind of arrangement in various centers across the country.
Laliet, you have excellent suggestion on this, and there is something in work in progress on this already, because this issue was raised and was faced by a lot of taxpayers, particularly the smaller ones. Now, what the system is being developed, and again, like I'm sorry to say, it is still being developed. It should have been in place before the scheme was introduced, but it isn't there. The Aikar Seva Kendras have been, wherever they are there in most of our income tax building now, have been given a mandate and a budget to have high-speed internet there, and the kind of kiosks which Lalitji is talking, the Aikar Seva Kendra will have persons sitting there who can assist persons in first filing the replies also, and even in cases where they want to have the video conference, they don't have the facility where they can face it, they will provide that. That is in process, and I mean, I've been out of it now for a good 6 months nearly. Even 6 months ago, this was being developed, and I'm sure it would be in a pretty advanced stage of developing. And the second thing is, Sanjay, which I wanted to make in this, is that the way the architecture and the SOPs have been laid out now, very senior officers have been made responsible for acts which were originally being taken by one AO. You know, in the SOPs, it is laid out that even at the questionnaire stage, an officer up to the rank of principal CIT would be involved. So it will take time, because, you know, there was a hue and cry when very broad questionnaires went to the taxpayers. इसको आने में थोड़ा सा समय लगेगा. समय इसलिए लगेगा यार, what we are trying to do is, can you imagine that an initial questionnaire is like an FIR for us in police. Now you're asking an IG Saab to be associated with writing of an FIR, because a principal commissioner is of IG's rank. So it will take time for the IG also to get used to the writing the FIR, but eventually the FIRs would be far, far superior than what a lower level constable was writing. So that is how the system is, and responsibility, what Lalitji is having apprehension, which is absolutely right. In the standard operating procedures, specific responsibility has been fixed of the superior officers, and some of them have been and would be put to question if all these infractions which Ketan is pointing out and which Lalitji is apprehending are there in number of cases. They will face that problem if they are not diligent enough to follow those. But yes, those gaps exist, and it is very unfortunate, both because of technology and because of lack of training as yet of every person in the income tax to work in a digital environment. Those gaps are, according to me, primarily because of that. Not because the architecture is wrong, not because the software which is there has problems. It has problems of matching up to the changes which we are bringing about, too fast. But it will fall in place. And I am at least very confident that this is the way forward. And we need to own it up, both from the officer side, from the tax professional side, as well as from the taxpayer side. And it will give far better results. And it is my firm belief that we are working towards a system where the cost of compliance would come down, where the number of cases of litigation arising out of tax assessments also will go down substantially. Our technical units are primarily aimed at that. And Lalitji, aapka wo point bilkul sahi hai. In the technical unit's responsibility is there that the jurisdictional high court's decision in that area is respected. And if it has not been done, I am sure in the next cycle, all the officers who are placed there will face the music. It is laid out very clearly in those SOPs. So
thanks. Ketan, you want to say something, but be very precise, because I think we are also.
Sir, we have just one small point, that we are in the first year of the system, and we have to also appreciate the fact that the times in which we have been in the first year of the system are challenging. These are not the normal times where the department also was adequately staffed or every staff was attending. So
Yes.
that also has to be borne in mind when we are evaluating the first year of the system.
I think the point is very well taken. And yeah, Lalitji.
Some related point, because it was a challenging time, therefore more बड़ा दिल दिखाना चाहिए था. Instead of giving expeditiously in a speedy manner, deciding the issue, considering that the person is under COVID, he made a request that he suffered from COVID, he is bedridden, he can't come here, without giving him more time to respond to the case. The assessments are completed or the appeal are disposed of. When some human approach is also expected from the.
No, but I think I'm sure each of you would agree that this was a difficult time. This was done at the time between the two pandemic waves, and the government has brought a very novel method system, and as pointed out by Pushpinder, that it is unique of its first kind in the world. And I'm sure there are some good teething problems, but overall, as I get to understand that there are some positives on this, and full kudos to the government team to working on this and trying to improve on the system. I do take the opportunity to thank you all, and I'm also taking this message that government needs to do far more, create a better trust between the taxpayer and the tax department, particularly on the NAFSC, and also certain confidence develop measures, something like communicating with the taxpayer away from the faceless assessment, what the system is, what it is, how does somebody take care of it, a guideline or a understanding of what is there in their mind, if that can be articulated and conveyed to the taxpayer in a very simple manner, that would really help. Pushpinder did point out about the Aikar Seva Kendra, and I know that the Aikar Seva Kendra need to be utilized for this purpose, because it started with a very laudable objective, and it should become a good place where the taxpayer and the tax department come face to face, more, even if in a digital medium, but in a better environment. I'm sure the audience must have taken note of many of these suggestions. Thanks a lot to all the panelists. Pushpinder, thank you very much. Thank you, Ketan, and thank you, Lalitji, for giving all your points of view. It was wonderful to have you and Pushpinder and Ketan on this panel. And thanks to Taxmann and for organizing this webinar, which is creating a broad-based panel, and and thanks to the audience for being with us on this webinar and for their questions, which I hope I have responded to all of them in a not one by one, but in a more generic manner, so that they can take home these certain suggestions and the articulation. Thanks a lot once again to all the panelists, and with my best wishes to all, and have a happy weekend. I say bye-bye to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.